Yeah, I mean, in a number of different ways. I mean, the first thing is I first took it as an honor to go and testify in front of both the Senate and the House. I'm an immigrant. I'm proud to be an American. I was brought into this very ornate room with marble in the back and the seal of the Senate, and I was like, okay, this is kind of it's a good moment as an American to have the privilege of being able to address the Senate and defend my project. And so that was kind of the first thought. The whole thing was very difficult, of course, because you have a lot of people, more in the House than in the Senate, but you have definitely many more people who are asking questions without really wanting to hear your answers.
Because they've already decided.
They've already decided.
Yeah.
And so it was very challenging, very long. The House one was, I think, 4 hours or more. So it's a long thing, but and then you have to also internalize the fact that you're not representing yourself or your own company. Mm-hmm. You're representing a very large company with a very large shareholder base, and all kinds of other companies that have decided to join you on a journey, that have trusted you on the basis of your personal relationship that you have with a lot of people. And so you're defending not only your own project, but the reputation of very successful companies that have decided to join you on a very difficult journey.
And the reason I ask is because you have decided to build this company with the only technology that can do the job of creating a neutral global asset. And even though sometimes I think we've gone too far for it now to be essentially banned, regulators can still make your life particularly difficult. And I'm assuming when you're raising money or you're explaining this to investors, you have to consider this, but you've gone for it anyway. And then so therefore, based on your experience, the risk was obviously worth it. But is that something you think about, or do you think we're beyond that?
No, I mean, there's always risks,
yeah.
And you have to internalize the risks and try to mitigate them as much as possible. I think if you're trying to do what I'm trying to do and many others are trying to do right now around this technology, you have to pick the asset and the platform that is the least likely to have these types of issues. And Bitcoin has more regulatory clarity than others, than any other crypto asset out there. It is widely accepted by a lot of regulated financial institutions. I mean, Fidelity has a Bitcoin-denominated 401k. There are a bunch of spot Bitcoin ETFs that are awaiting approval. Eventually, it'll happen.
Yeah.
And outside of the U.S., banks can touch Bitcoin and they want to really embrace the capabilities that Bitcoin bring to the table. So I think we're in a world where we're past the point of existential threat to Bitcoin. It's not completely off the table, but I feel like in the land of all of digital assets, ones you can create, ones that already exist, it is by far, and arguably maybe by an order of magnitude, better equipped to resist to all of these types of attacks and challenges.
And there are now pro-Bitcoin people within the Senate and the House.
Absolutely, yeah.
Actually, isn't the new speaker?
Yeah,
he's pro-Bitcoin.
Patrick McHenry. Yeah, very much so, yes.
Which I find fascinating that we do have these politicians who pro, but then it kind of makes sense because if you look at where they tend to be based, it tends to be places like Texas, and they tend to be pro. But okay, so I want to talk more about the company now. Then, so based on your experience of trying to establish what you wanted to do within Facebook, within Libra, and having met Liz back in 2018, and knowing the infrastructure wasn't ready, was this just the obvious company to create that you knew you could create? Probably the most important backbone part of the Lightning Network. Yeah,
I mean, and before I get to that, I think one important point, and you mentioned that there are people in the Senate, in the House, across a number of countries and jurisdictions that are Bitcoiners or believe in Bitcoin at least, or the value of Bitcoin being in existence and of use. It's such a wonderful thing to be building on top of an open standard that has people believing in it versus you having to be the grand preacher of something net new and trying to bring a lot of people to believe in it, to trust you, etc. It's a game changer. It's liberating in a way to build on top of Bitcoin, where you have millions of people who really believe in it. Some people would argue hundreds of millions of people, but at least tens of millions of people really, really believe in it. It's a very different atmosphere to build on. And it's I was reminded of this, and we missed each other at Bitcoin Miami in April, but we do these dinners when we travel and we invite clients and partners. And you can see the belief and the fervor around the table when we were having those conversations around why Bitcoin. And so for us, it makes our job a lot easier than trying to build a new standard and compete with a bunch of other standards for the attention and belief of people.
Well, I found my own personal conviction has been from traveling, and not that I think this Bitcoin fixes it meme works in every country. I mean, I there's lots of issues in countries like Lebanon, Argentina, and Venezuela, all these places I've traveled to, but it's because I've seen everything else so broken, so utterly broken in these countries, and I've seen the hardship and the difficulty that's put on people. That's what gives me my conviction is that there's a necessity for this.
Yes, and it's interesting because it serves a purpose of truly bringing native neutral internet money to the world. And that in itself, despite the fact that it has volatility and all kinds of other issues, has so much value. The purity of having a truly neutral native internet store of value is of incredible value, and it also serves as a check and balance. And that's also why a lot of people appreciate the fact that it exists, because if you have a great currency and you're running your country and your central bank in an appropriate way, then you're fine. But if you're not, you have an alternative. You have an escape valve, and that's a check and balance that I think is so incredibly helpful for the world and good for people. So very different.
I've asked this question. I've never really got a solid answer from that before. Is there a risk, or do you think there's always going to be a need for base chain?
Yes, there's always going to be a need for base chain. Without it, then the whole trust model collapses. And as we've discussed, it's really why Bitcoin is unique, is this trust model. So,
but could it take a significant amount away from the base chain?
I think it'll take, so let me back up for a second. First of all, I think it's going to generate a tremendous amount of transaction volume that is currently definitely not on Bitcoin right now. If you look at the legacy payment rails out there, if you look at a correspondent banking network where you have most of the money settling between currencies and countries on a daily basis, except on weekends and after hours, that's $5 trillion a day. That's $5 to $6 trillion a day. So it's a tremendous amount of volume. And so when you think about an alternative between all of those new domestic real-time payment systems that are starting to pop up. You have Pix in Brazil, you have real-time payment systems in Mexico, you have real-time payment systems in Europe in a lot of places. You have FedNow that is eventually going to become a thing in the US. And so what is the interoperability? Yeah, it'll happen. It's taking time. It'll happen. So when you think about how do you interoperate between all of these systems, the various currencies, the various addressing standards, like every bank account or Pix address, Pix ID looks very different than a SEPA IBAN thing. So once you solve for all of that and you start to have volume migrate, you're talking about a lot of volume. And so when you have a tremendous amount of volume on Bitcoin, it makes layer one a lot more valuable. And the fees you're going to be willing to pay for larger transactions, like very large transactions between institutions on layer one, are going to be much higher than what you currently pay. And the rest for smaller transactions is going to exist on Lightning for the vast majority. And when I say large transactions, I mean very large transactions.
So do you therefore see Bitcoin, rather than something that is there just to replace all the other payment rails of some Bitcoin a single hope, it maybe becomes the glue between systems?
That's the way we see the opportunity. We think that's where Bitcoin shines, because if you're trying to so look at what's happening in a lot of countries. In India, you have UPI. In Brazil, you have Pix, immensely successful. Pix wasn't even a thing a few years ago, and now everyone is using it daily for transactions in a very efficient way. But the Brazilian government wants to export Pix. The Indian government wants to export UPI. We will want to export whatever form of system we want to export, etc. And no other country really wants another country's payment system.
Nope.
And so what is the most neutral thing that is maybe not going to be accepted with a band, but and a welcoming committee, but is not going to be thrown up all over. And it's the thing that is neutral and that can do a really good job at moving value around the world, and that also happens to have the best liquidity profile of any neutral asset out there. So when you think about it, it's an ideal neutral internet settlement asset and network. Ideal.
But it also feels like this system, which you look at what Jack Mallers has done with Strike, and I'm assuming you think it's similar. This system to act as that glue between nations. You've got bordering nations in. Did that come up in our conversation the other day? Bordering nations. Where was it we discussed it? There was bordering nations in Africa who can't do business with each other because they don't want each other's currency. But Bitcoin allows them to settle between each other.
Yeah, because you have the forward deployed liquidity of Bitcoin with exchanges that can trade in and out of different currencies really effectively, with Bitcoin being at the center of it. Yes.
And it feels like Bitcoin and I know some people won't like this because they want Bitcoin to replace and fix everything in the world and there'll be no other monies. But we know that's not going to be true, certainly not in the short term. But there's this glue between all the financial systems. I feel like that's like another unknown that's come out of this.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's coming. in view more clearly for me because also of the rise of real-time payment systems at the edges. Because if you have really good payment systems domestically that are using the country's national currency, which is what governments want, and I'm not suggesting we always need to do exactly this, but I feel like if you're going against governments for a thing that they care a lot about, which is controlling their own currencies and not delegating that power to private institutions or other players. I think I've experienced the downsides of doing that without fully realizing how much they cared about this, but now I do. You come to the conclusion that actually this is just perfect for it. It's the perfect fit between real-time payment systems that are developing everywhere in the world. It has the liquidity, it has the regulatory clarity, it has the proper decentralization, and it also serves, in some cases, in some countries, as a good check and balance because your home currency is not managed appropriately and you have devaluation and massive inflation and you have no place to store your money except buying things and spending every penny you have every time you get a paycheck. So it's a pretty remarkable thing when you think about it. And I agree with you. I don't think that this was foreseen, but the power of these incentives that have been coded in this algorithm are producing new miracles almost every couple of years. And this one would be a very significant one because if you have the ability to move money globally in real time, 24/7 at a low cost, and everyone is on the same network, irrespective of their country, their home currency, their home payment system, then I think you can unleash a ton of GDP for the world. I think that the world's GDP is constrained by the inefficacy and the crumbling state of our payment systems that were, for the most part, invented in the 60s and 70s. And so if you remove all of that inefficiency, if you enable money to travel globally the same way that you said an email or a text message, and if that value can get to its destination 6 months earlier, like if you're a YouTube creator and you're not on the long tail, you're at the top of the tail, but at the head. But if you're at the end of the tail and you get paid like $120 every 6 months and you're not in the US, you'll get paid every 6 months. And so what happens if you can actually get paid at the end of every video view, even if it's like 30 cents or 50 cents or $1, you're going to spend that dollar in your local economy much sooner. And so what is the downstream effect of that trickle effect of all of that money moving freely, like everything else on the internet does?